A little bit about me, I'll put up a slide here at the end, but here's many different ways you can reach out to me. If you want the code samples or anything, you can head over to my website, which is here, and go to presentations, and you can get the PowerPoints and any of the source code. I'll also pop up this link at the end. So we're going to have a slightly modified agenda. We're going to kind of talk about how to get started with developer containers. Then we're going to build one or two of them. We'll customize them and then show you how you can use them. We're going to skip over the multiple containers in one, but then we'll also talk about how you can use the containers on GitHub. If there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand at any point in time. I'll just ignore you like my wife ignores me, or I'll get to you during a logical break, so feel free to raise your hands. So why do we want dev containers? Lots of times you always get this, hey, it works on my machine when I built it out. This is a way for us to be able to get the code working and working the same on any machine, plus also using new technologies without corrupting your machine. I do a lot of public speaking, which means I have a lot of different languages and or technologies I use. And before dev containers came out, I was installing betas of Python, of Jekyll, of .NET, of you name it. So my machine was always a hot mess. I was repaving it every couple of weeks, sometimes weekly, just to kind of keep it fresh. Well, with dev containers, you don't really have to do that as much. And we'll see some of that in the coming minutes. We got about 2-3 minutes of slides, and then we'll kind of get into the code. Some of the requirements, you need Docker Desktop for either Mac or Windows, or you can actually do it with Rancher. Basically, you just need the Docker exe that runs containers. Then you need Visual Studio Code. That's free. You can go to microsoft.com/Visual Studio to download it. Then you need the Dev Containers extension. Now, one note about the Dev Containers extension, depending on the documentation you see, it's referred to by 3 different names. When it first came out, it was called Remote Containers, and that lasted for about 6 months to a year. Then it got changed to Dev Containers, and then kind of sort of is changing over to Developer Containers. So depending on where the blog post was at the time, you'll see it referenced as Dev Containers or Development Containers. So before we build some, let's kind of look at what they are. So the Dev Containers piece is on the left-hand side, so basically everything in blue. You have 3 things you need to worry about when you're building an app: the inner loop, then the outer loop, and then the deployment. One thing you have in common is the OS, runtimes, and shared libraries, and that's where the Dev Containers piece comes in. Underneath the scenes, it's basically running Docker and loading up containers. So you have the operating system, runtime, and any of the shared libraries, so whatever frameworks you're using, .NET, Java, etc. Then you need, in the dev container piece, you need your compilers and your SDKs. If you're in the .NET world, you need MS Build. If you're in the Node world, you need Node or NPM, etc. But where dev containers really shines is this point: the debuggers, the operating system utilities, command line utilities, and the personalization. One of the things I really like about using dev containers, and we'll see it once we start building them, is that you can create very specific instances of Visual Studio Code just for that. So in the demos you'll see I have a set of customizations for doing .NET development, and then for my personal blog, which we'll see the source code for, that's written with Jekyll and Ruby. There's a separate set of customizations that are specific to that. And the real benefit is if you're working with the team, that file kind of goes along so everyone has the same customizations across the board. So dev containers is basically broken up into 3 pieces. It starts off with the template, then moves up to the feature, and then the container, the dev container or developer container level. So at the template, you're basically choosing what operating system and or what languages you want to use. Then at the feature level, you're adding things to it, like extra build tools or extra client configuration tools. And then at the container level, you are adding in your debuggers, your personalization, etc. So let's look at some of the templates that are here. You have, and this is only a short list. If you go to this URL here, which I'll reference at the end in the slides, there's Alpine images, there's Debian images, there's Scala images, there's Ruby, there's Jekyll, there's Java. There's about 80 or 90 different images that you can choose from for this. For features, these are basically add-ons. So you can add on for AWS command line interface, the Azure, .NET, Hugo, NPM. So this is where you really start to tie down what you need. And the beauty about this is if you're a consultant, you can have a dev container for each of your clients. So it's basically stored in source what the development environment should be for you, and you can just pull that package or pull that repo onto your machine and create the dev container so you can move from machine to machine fairly easily. What we'll see at the end is I'm going to show you running my website or editing for my website in GitHub without having anything installed on my machine, but a browser like Chrome or Internet Explorer. So enough of me talking, or at least enough of PowerPoint. Bye-bye, PowerPoint. We'll come back in a little bit. We're going to go and look at some of the code or some of the products. So this is the code that, or this is the container extension that you need for Visual Studio. As you can see here, if I zoom in, it was originally called Visual Studio Remote Containers, and they still kept that name because it's the same extension, but over time they realized that they should call it Dev Containers. So you can just install it from there or do it from Visual Studio extensions. Let's look at some of the templates. Can you see the font in the cheap seats, or should I increase it? Okay, I'll increase it. You never know what the projector is going to be like when you get in a room. So as you see here, there are lots of different templates. Now, two things I want to point out for the templates is the maintainers and the reference. Anything by dev container spec maintainers, that's the actual team that is responsible for building developer containers or dev containers. It's a consortium of like Docker, Microsoft, and like 4 or 5 other companies that created this spec and maintain it. And then all these are actual links to it. So if you want to see what is comprised of the C# template, you can open it up, and then you'll see everything that's part of the C# template. So it's fully visible. There's nothing really hidden for it. The templates just give you the basic footprint of the operating system and/or programming language you're going to use. Then you're going to look at features next. Features are multiple things. Now you can add one or more features to your dev container. Obviously, you probably wouldn't add AWS and Azure to it, but you might do something like what I typically do is common utilities, and then the GitHub CLI, and then way down the list is SCH for terminal access. And I'll show you how you can add in all these right now. So I'm going to open up a instance of Visual Studio Code. And to show you, I am not cheating, we're going to open up this folder here that has nothing in it. And I generally wear short sleeve shirts to show you that there's nothing up my sleeves. There's no hidden trickery. So we're going to open up this folder. So it's in C projects, and then container demo. And you see there's still nothing in here. So let's select this folder. And that's Visual Studio, remembering the last time I opened up this folder that there was something here. So you're going to open up the command palette. So it's Control Shift P, and let me zoom in on the font a little bit in here. Editor appearance, where's my zoom? I always forget where the zoom is on here. There it is, zoom in. Do Control equals, give us some more room. Now you open up your command palette, which is typically Control Shift P on a Windows machine or Command Shift P on a Mac. And you type in dev containers, and you see that there are a lot of them. Add container configuration, clone, etc. We're going to do add dev configuration file. Now this is going to put in the file that's going to use that basically describes the developer container you want. So we're going to add a configuration to workspace. Now you have two options here. The user data folder, this will put it into your local on a Windows machine, your app data on a Mac in your username / file. Typically, if you're working in a team, you want to put it in the workspace, so it's going to create a .dev container folder. Then the next thing is I need to choose the container. So I'm going to, in this particular case, want to learn how to use .NET, so I'm going to pick .NET. And then because I picked .NET, it wants to know what version of .NET I'm going to use. So if I have a client that's on 6, I can choose 6, 7, or 8. And the same thing happens if you're using Jekyll or Node or everything. Each one of the templates can have one or more extra configuration items. What this basically is going to do, what we'll see next, is it basically tells Docker what image to pull down from it. So we're going to choose the default one. Then I'm going to have the ability to choose which features I want to put in. So I generally choose common utilities, which has things like OMySCH to customize my terminal. And then sometimes I'm crazy and want to use the GitHub CLI versus Visual Studio. And then I am going to use the ZHS plugins, something I'm used to. Now I can choose to config defaults or config options, which is going to show me each of the options for each of the different plugins or features. I'm going to choose the defaults because that's totally fine by now. So we get this new 2 files added, or 2 folders. One is a dev container, which has the JSON file, which just popped open here, and then this .github. This is new. This only got added in the last version or 2, and what this basically does is adds in all your GitHub dependencies. So if you're using a workflow to push it, or in this case, depend the bot. So let's take a look at the dev container section. It's a JSON. You can click up here to see the specifications. It's going to outline every single line of the JSON file, and then this is the source code for the template I picked. So since I chose the C# one, I can go to this URL to see it. First thing is the name. The name could be anything you want. So I'm going to call this learning.net. And this is what Visual Studio is going to show us right here in this little blue area. And then this is the image that's pulled. So if we look at the GitHub repo that I showed before, you'll see that the template has what I have selected in text as the default, and this 8.0 was those options that I chose. And then it's a list of all the features to choose. So here I chose Common Utilities, version 2, CLI version 2, etc. The others I'm not going to cover. They're a little bit more advanced, like if you're using something like in the next demo that I have for my site, I use Jekyll, and Jekyll exposes port 4000, so we have to turn on that port. But for this, Visual Studio Code and .NET, this is all I need. So the next thing I need to do is save it, and then I need to do rebuild and reopen in container. Once I do that, you'll see it'll start to load, and hopefully the Wi-Fi is good, although I kind of ran through this demo up in my hotel room earlier to make sure that it already downloaded all the images, or the Docker images, so you didn't have to see it going. So basically is right now it installed it, and now it's installing all the bridges. So you see here that now it says Docker container learning.net, so it's connected to my Docker instance. And if I open up Docker right now and go to containers, I have this new one here called Cool Haslet. Now the dev containers generates a random 2-word name for it. It's usually some adjective and some noun. And a fun fact, if you generate a dev container on Halloween, you'll get some Halloween themed names like ravaging vampires and stuff like that. There's a whole hackathon project at GitHub to come up with the names. So now this is running, and I am in a terminal, or I'm in the container. I see there are 2 ports opened. These are ports that are used by Visual Studio to kind of talk to the container, but now I'm in a fully fledged container, so I can start with a new .NET project. So I can do .NET-version and figure out, this feature, so the .NET image that is on for dev containers is outdated, so you always have to run this tool. And don't worry about it now, we're not going to go through it, but eventually you would see that we have the ability to run .NET. And let's go over to take a look at another machine. So to prove I'm not hiding anything, I'm going to open up a window, and let's zoom in on you a little bit. I'm going to run bundle and show that I don't have bundle installed on my machine. So I'm going to open up my website, which is a dev container. So I'm going to do open recent and then choose. Now you see here, it says I can open C projects container -demo, and then there's a brackets for dev container, meaning open it up remotely in the dev container, or just open up the folder by itself if you want to do editing of it. Now this folder doesn't really exist, so we're going to go and open up this one on my machine. The files don't actually exist, so we're going to be working with a copy of it inside of Docker. Now it's opening it up, it's connecting to it, and then eventually I have all the code. So I can do anything that I would be able to do, like pull the latest version down. I think there's nothing in there, or there's no updates to it. But you'll see here on the extensions that there's 3 sets of extensions. There's the recommended, which is usually almost garbage. And then there's the local installed. So I have 66 extensions installed in Visual Studio Code. But I'm only using 8 for this dev container instance. So I'm using GitHub Copilot, ESLint, GitHub Actions, GitHub Copilot, and because I'm using Markdown, I have a couple of different Markdown things and Ruby. Now I don't necessarily need to have any of these on my machine. It's going to pull them down and use them inside of this container. So I think I can show you that I don't have the Markdown emoji. Actually, no, I have all these, because if I didn't have one of them, there would be a little menu item here that says install locally. But this is running here. If you go, like in the next minute, I'm going to show you what it looks like on GitHub, and then you'll see I don't have anything there, and it's going to pull them all down. So let's take a look at the slight differences with this container file. Oh, he's itching to lift that 5-minute sign. I can see him now. You see here, now I have exposed ports 4000, so I'm opening up port 4000 for this. And Visual Studio Code has listed as 1 port open and I scroll in and see it's 4,000. Now there's this customization section. I'm saying, let's customize the instance of Visual Studio and the extensions, and adding a list of all the extensions that I want. So you basically go here, I know, thank you, here, and you can see what the extension ID is. So I can do copy and then paste it in here. So once you get it working, you can get it working locally and then get the dev configuration file. You can go to like the Visual Studio Code Marketplace and paste all these in. And then the other thing I have here is a container environment. So if you're used to working with Docker, there's the concept of environment variables. Because this gets built on GitHub, I need to provide a GitHub token because I'm accessing something called a remote repository for it. So this allows me to access that local variable. So here it's saying use the local environment, so my machine right now, and get the variable called GitHub tokens. Now if I wanted to run this site, I can open up a new terminal and do that. But I'm not going to do that. Let's go to our repo, and this is my repo for that blog. So the same exact thing where I got it from, it's public. You can look at it to see any blog posts or the way it's there. I'm going to go and create a code space on main. So what this is going to do is build a series of virtual machines. Normally takes a little bit faster than that, but I have them pre-built, so it builds it almost instantly. So now it's reading the dev container.json file, and it's going to build out my environment. So if we look at extensions, there are no extensions listed right now. And once this is complete, in 30 seconds or so, we should see this start to pop up with it. So it ran the last script it was just creating, now it's getting them, and now it's going to start populating all the other extensions. So here you see it installed, or it's in the process of installing all these extensions, are the ones I require. And then, come on, you can do it. Once they're all done installing, I can start editing the site. Here's the site as we listed it. So I'm going to go and let's go and edit this most recent blog post, and I'm going to say hello. I'm going to say hello, Lambda. Visual Studio keeps stealing the focus of the mic, or of the thing, and then save it. Now let's go here and choose bundle, execute, Jekyll, Jekyll, serve, and it's going to serve my site running locally inside of GitHub, or at least a virtual server in GitHub, in about 10 seconds or so. And by the way, this is the best name ever for a dev container, bug-free space parakeet. I wish I can always have bug-free code. So now it's running, and then Visual Studio Code says, oh, I see you have port 4000 open and something's there. I can go click on it and see it. And now if I look at this, I should see oh, I forgot to save it. I would have seen the working with, is that the right one that I opened? Oh yeah, I didn't save it. So let me save it. This page is going to regenerate. And then, come on. Oh, that's generating. I'll bring up the reference slide since we are, look, he's clapping. I'm not even done yet. That's awesome. So basically what we see here is that, we don't need this slide because you can get that. So now with dev containers, you can actually say, works on my machine, so it's a DevOps team problem. If there are any questions, here's a resource link for all the parts I covered. My site, where you see a blog post on it, as well as the GitHub repo for my blog if you want to read about it, and then everything else that you would need to get started. Any questions? Wow, quiet group. That means I'm an awesome presenter and everyone got everything out of it, or you're still just waking up from your nap. Yes, sir.
Where exactly do the extensions for the dev containers run when they're in the browser versus local? Like, are they running inside a Docker container locally and on the remote server in the browser, or are they actually running in the browser?
So my understanding is the way it works is you're getting a virtual machine and you're only seeing the IDE, so everything's running inside. There's a separate Docker container that's running on GitHub that does all the processing. Visual Studio Code is just a mirror into that container. So everything's running on that public GitHub code space that you created.
Okay, so if you had an extension that would normally run in the actual browser, it'll be running remotely when you use a dev container.
Correct. Yes, sir, in the back.
Can I extend those files? Suppose something you have defined, and I think that I just need few more. Can I say that in a expressive way?
What kind of, so the question was, can I extend those files? What kind of extension do you want to do?
So let's say you have a configuration file for dev containers. You don't have my Z-cell, but I want to add Z-cell, but I don't want to write what you have. I just want to use everything you have and add Z-cell to it. How do I do that in a
I
easier
don't know
way?
what Z-Cell is, if that's like a normal Visual Studio extension, yes. There's also the ability in dev containers, there's a startup command and a shutdown command and a create command. So anytime your container is created, you can run a bash script to do any additional work you need. You can also run it anytime the container starts up and or anytime the container shuts down. So you can add in your own commands to it.
Okay.
And that being said, I'm going to turn it off so the next presenter can come in. If you have questions, I'll stand out in the lobby afterwards. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Joseph.